Hey everybody, welcome to the Distro Boss Podcast. This is Sav Ora. I'm here with Michael Greenhough. He's the director and co-founder of a company called MyCarbon. They're a consultancy and they specialize in reducing their clients' carbon footprint all the way down to net zero. So they use offsetting and they have some sort of a calculator. It's really interesting stuff. If you watch the news for any longer than like 10 or 15 minutes, you're going to see or hear about something to do with sustainability. And I've always wanted to speak to a company specifically about this because it's clear that there's a lot of attention on this industry and this sector and these things that happen here with sustainability. But I've not really figured out how you actually make money in that world commercially. Like, how do you just get into business doing that? So first off, welcome, Michael. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Sav. Thanks for having me. Look forward to talking to you.
Brilliant, brilliant. So what is it that you do? What is it like? I want to have a really candid conversation. This is going to be where you kind of like educating me, but for the bet as like a proxy for everybody else that's watching. Like, I think what is it that your company does, and how do you get involved with that world?
So as you've mentioned, we would classify ourselves as a sustainability consultant. So MyCarbon at the moment, we're a team of we've got 10, including myself and the co-founder. Full time, and about 5 or 6 consultants, and then a few support staff. But as I said, we classify ourselves as sustainability consultants, but we have a certain specialization, and that is the carbon world. And we try and focus on everything carbon related to sustainability, because we see that as one of the most significant sort of environmental issues that companies are going to have to adapt to in order to continue to operate, because there's a huge amounts of pressure on companies at the moment, both legislative, from customers, from investors, to reduce carbon footprint. And obviously the reason we want to do that is to help the environment. Carbon dioxide directly results in global warming, and there is no doubt about that. The scientific consensus is definite. Very frequently hear, arguments against that, and I've got every answer for them. I still haven't heard any good arguments.
Well, this is the thing.
Yeah.
Like when you say that, right? Like when you say like people have a lot of stuff to say against it. There's an analogy actually. This has just come to mind. Like I was teaching this the other day about building like fanfare for your business, and I used this analogy of a campfire, if you will. Like it was like if you had one log and you try to set it alight, you'd have a bit of trouble doing it. You'd only have like maybe a tiny little flame for a tiny bit. So really what you want to have is 2 logs, and if 2 logs you'll have a flame, and if you have 3 logs you'll have a fire, and 4 logs you'll have a blaze, and so on and so forth. You have this huge fire. So the more logs that you can put on this thing, on this campfire, the bigger the blaze you're going to get, right? So it's kind of like, if that's a business and the more people involved, you're going to have a lot of attention. The blaze is essentially like the amount of attention that you're getting.
Yeah.
And so the bigger the blaze you get, the better it is. And of course, if you put a wet log on that blazing fire, what happens to the wet log? Like it dries out and it sets ablaze too, right? So that's kind of like the idea of building this kind of business that you're marketing. That's where I was really focused on with that conversation, with sales and marketing. So in the case of you, it's like, well, in the world of sustainability, it's like there's all this attention, right? But it's not that you get one wet log being thrown at it. You get a lot. There's a lot of people like saying, no, that's bullshit. This is nonsense. I mean, I've presidents and stuff like that. They in fact, forget wet logs. They're dumping buckets of water on this fire, but somehow still, after all this time, and it's still ablaze. Like it's nonstop. But I think from like an outsider, and when I look at this, I'm like, what is the actual, like, there's so much attention, but I can see that there's tons of money involved. I see big investments. I see hedge funds dumping money there. I see wind farms going up everywhere. Someone's paying for this stuff. Like, where does it all happen? Where is the money? How do you even get paid in this kind of business?
Well, I'd say first things first, most of the stuff that companies can do now to actually, deal with their carbon, to improve their carbon footprint, has a reasonably positive return on investment. There's quite a lot of reasonably good studies out there looking at FTSE 100 companies or S&P 500 companies, and looking at their sort of decarbonization journey. And there's a specific organization that they can apply to sort of verify that journey, called the Science Based Targets Initiative. What they've sort of identified is that operating margin for these companies that are investing more in sustainability, they often have a higher operating margin than those that don't. Because, well, for a big one is renewable energy. Obviously, that's the big ticket in reducing your carbon footprint. If you can decarbonize the energy that you consume, in many cases it's cheaper, and it's getting cheaper every single year. It has been doing for the last 30 years. It's probably only in the last decade though that it started to become, really financially beneficial to those companies.
So these companies, so this is going towards, this is the net zero thing, right? So they're trying to get down. Is that what we're talking about here?
That's it. So yeah, so
okay.
net zero is bringing your carbon emissions down.
And net zero doesn't mean actual zero, right? Because I feel like I kind of understand it, but I don't truly. I feel like that's one of those things. It's like, there's a word. It's kind of just like a threshold. It's like you're not necessarily actually at zero. You just.
This is why we exist.
Okay.
Sav, because it is incredibly complicated, and also it's incredibly new, and it's changing quite quickly, right? All of the rules, the legislation, the words involved. But net zero is, by definition, reducing your emissions down to zero. But that's not actually practically possible. There are probably no net zero companies out there at the moment. All you can do is set a plan to reach net zero. And going back to the Science-Based Targets Initiative, they basically, I would say, are the sort of worldwide, they create the worldwide definition for what net zero looks like and what companies can commit to now, which will be a 90% reduction in their emissions by 2050 at the latest. They would classify that as reaching net zero at 2050 if you reduce by 90%. But that's not just the emissions that you release directly as a business, and not just from the energy you purchase. It's from almost every activity within your business that might generate those emissions. So even the products you purchase, right, they have to be net zero as well.
Yeah, because I remember reading something, and this was like one of those days where I had too much time on my hands, and I was reading an article in The Economist. So I don't know if you read that enough. Like that, those articles can take a minute to get through.
Yes.
And I remember reading something about how, there was an argument for like the banking infrastructure and how using like blockchain, and I mean, I know I don't want to specifically talk too much about decentralized finance and stuff, but that's a whole topic in and of itself, right? But talking about, using the blockchain and these cryptocurrencies, how it's like massively reducing like infrastructure needs, and therefore like can help bring the organizations to like carbon neutral, net zero. But then there was also this conversation of all the electricity that is used to actually produce these coins, or to do the brain power, the computing power behind it. They actually drive up a lot of resources. And so that, in fact, where you think in one sense, like one side of the business is completely squeaky clean, the other side is like super intense, and it's actually producing a lot of waste. And so like there's a lot of like effort now on what you're saying was like kind of like looking at the entire map, looking at the entire
value stream, right? That's what we would tend to call it, both upstream and downstream. So, like before products hit your direct operations, so if you've got blockchain feeding your operations or your products or your services, they'd be your upstream emissions. And then when you actually deliver a product or a service, they can also generate emissions as well. That's why oil and gas companies, are, even though they don't necessarily directly produce a huge amount of emissions themselves, they still do in comparison to a lot of other businesses. But it's what happens to their products.
Oh wait, oil and gas don't produce that much? It's like you'd instantly just paint them as the bad guys, right? Isn't that like oil and gas paint? They must be bad, So I could see like well, they standing outside their offices and stuff with pitchboards and stuff.
Well, I guess this is also a politicized argument in itself, so I've got to be quite careful what I say here. But their operations do produce a lot of emissions, right? But it's nothing compared to the products that they sell. It's everyone burning, fuel in their cars and gas and power plants that generates the value chain emissions for oil and gas company. They still do, they've got shipping and these massive sort of infrastructure projects that generate emissions, directly within their operations. And they also, have a lot of leaking gas and methane venting all over the globe that does drive up those emissions massively, because methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. Every ton of methane that leaks into the atmosphere is is the equivalent of leaking 30 to 40 tons of CO2, and it's
wow.
so it's significant. But it is the
So
products that they
these
sell.
methane, like this is the stuff that doesn't smell, right? This is the stuff that you can get in your house, right?
This is the stuff that goes directly into your house. Yeah, natural
Okay.
gas.
All right.
Natural gas. That's
Aren't
like
there
one.
like massive pockets of this just under like Siberia and various other like ice caps somewhere, like just huge, worried about when they melt that these things are just going to just evaporate into not evaporate, but like just be exposed to the environment?
Yeah, and that's a big issue. That there are we call these like climate tipping points in this industry, and it's where climate change results in more climate change. Because
we say tipping points, I almost feel like it's like catastrophes. It's like tipping points. It's like a nice word to say. Basically, we did all this work to get this far, and then boom, we've got to now we've got to start again. Like
yeah, it's almost like we could put ourselves in a position where we create this self-perpetuating chain of events that we can't control. Forest fires are a big one at the moment, but imagine if the entire Amazon rainforest burned down and the amount of CO2 that would be released from that. Right. Wow. And as it gets hotter, the likelihood of it just setting on fire and not going out gets higher. Then we have these sort of methane deposits in Siberia. They hold gigatons of methane. And as they melt, this is.
I don't even know what that looks like. I can't even visualize what a gigaton of gas looks like. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's it's pretty much impossible. Like it's just an insane amount. But then you've also got like the death of sort of the death of any living thing, right? So the oceans absorb a huge amount of CO2, and it's not just the actual water itself; it's the organisms living within them. And as the oceans are currently heating up quicker than they've done in pretty much any period of history. Ecosystems won't be able to adapt to that, and huge extinction events will happen in the next hundreds of years. Like stuff's just going to die out, because when these cycles of temperature change have happened over time previously, they've been over tens of thousands of years. So ecosystems can try to adapt over those time periods. But since the 1970s, the temperature has skyrocketed alongside CO2 in ways that are just have never been seen in the last million. Because we can prove this, like over the last million years, we can see how temperatures have fluctuated, and we know these sort of events. We've seen a degree of global average temperature increase. It doesn't sound like much, but it's a lot. That hasn't happened.
Where the problems are. Like that's where it's like sometimes I guess difficult for like definitely people like me, like who do I represent? Just the everyday kind of business enthusiast who's like, okay, I get it. There's these huge like world-changing issues, and if you it's like which rabbit hole do you go down? Like that you spoke about the sea. If you look at like the gas deposits, if you look at wildlife, it's like there's all these big, massive problems to solve, and then you've got like these. Then we start talking about little numbers like 1 degree shifts here and there and the impact that would have. And it's like, it's kind of it's like you've really got to understand it to know the degree of how important this is. And then also what do you do about it? Because obviously there's so many people like lobbying and talking about it, but it's like, it's hard to see like how you can get involved with it. It's like, what do just like not throw stuff away or be very careful at how you recycle. Like for that, I guess that's just for the everyday person. But what about getting into business? Like, what do you do? Like, I mean, for example, there's some things that I've seen, like where if you have something I'm starting to see some business models emerge. Like, for example, I think when we've had a very first conversation before this podcast, and I first reached out to you, I think I remember speaking to you about Elon Musk and how he had I had read an article about how he had made all these billions of dollars selling his electric cars, or producing them, manufacturing and selling these things. But he was also making a significant amount of money. I don't think it matched the amount he was of his natural, of his car sales, but like he was making in the billions of just selling off his carbon credits, that so other companies or organizations or countries or whatever could offset their own carbon. Is that right? Like you could get involved with a business and then kind of like be a broker or something, or I don't know how it works. Yeah.
The carbon market is definitely the opportunities there are massive. one reason is because it's still a reasonably early market, and there are two types. There's a voluntary market and the compulsory market. So voluntary market is the stuff you tend to hear all the press about, whether it's bad or it's mainly bad, and I would say some of that's quite unfair. And then the compulsory market is for the big industrial businesses that have government setting them limits, and if they are above that limit, they have to buy these allowances, and then if they're below, they can sell. But that's where the Elon Musks and the Teslas sit. The voluntary market is people buy some land or protect some rainforest, grow some trees, build like renewable energy infrastructure in developing countries that wouldn't be there otherwise. That's a sort of voluntary market where I see a lot of opportunity for people to jump in and start their own business. Like that's kind of how our business started in the first place. We wanted to go to Uganda because we had a few sort of school links there, and buy some land and grow some trees and get into this carbon game. Uganda was very, very difficult to do that. It took us ages to set up a business, set up a bank account. And by that time, we kind of thought maybe this is the best idea.
What was it that was like what were the choke points with that? Was it like it wasn't a simple process of just walking into a bank and setting one up?
Yeah.
Or was it like you have to like deal with people, these intermediaries, you can't, like consultancy fees you have to pay, that kind of stuff.
Consultancy fee. Yeah. There were all of those basically. In the UK, we're lucky. I think it's maybe in a day or two we can set up a business, right, and a limited liability business, and start something and grow something. In a lot of other countries, that takes way longer. And in Uganda, it basically took us about a year. We could have paid some consultancy fees, but you got to be very careful in doing that. If you want to grow a proper business, it's you're just probably shooting yourself in the foot in breaking the rules from the beginning.
Well, I just know that whenever like my family's from Kenya, and so whenever I've spoken to my family abroad, and they're like, when it comes to setting up shop in Africa is a different place. Like you don't just go on to like online and say set up a limited company today, pay the fee, and before that you can have it rushed to you like before the end of the end of the day, or next day you'd have yourself a limited company already formed and registered office in play, and you'd basically be in a position to open a bank account straight, or you could even open the bank account along with the setup, and you're ready to go straight away. That does not exist in Africa.
No, I'm sure it's much easier if you're sort of domiciled in Africa, but I think it was very difficult for us. We still have a lot of involvement in Africa. Like we've got a lot of clients there. We've got some partners that we work with over there, and very entrepreneurial and also very driven to sort of fight climate change themselves, because in reality they're going to be much worse hit by it than us. And also it gives them sort of opens trade opportunities for them with the West as well, because the West is putting so much pressure on this, and if you can sell a product that has good sustainability credentials behind it, it opens doors for you in the UK or the US. But yeah, setting up a business there I'd like to do it in the future, when we've got a bit more time and a bit more capital to actually make that happen. I really, really would. That'd be amazing. But starting a startup consultancy like that doesn't work as well.
But that was you say the voluntary, just so that was the voluntary market you were getting involved with.
Yeah. So the voluntary market is it's if a company wants to go out there and offset their emissions, so buy carbon credits, and do a process called retiring, which is basically deleting them on a permanent ledger, could be a blockchain. Then they can state, they've offset X amount of their emissions, but they do that on a voluntary basis the majority of the time. So they would
when it's voluntary, they're actually paying to it. They're paying for this to happen.
Yes.
Right? So I guess that's what was leading a question I was leading to. Is like, so what happens? So you've got the voluntary and you've got the compulsory. So I guess that's like government saying you've got to get to this level, like you mentioned, and if you don't, like, what happens? Do we shut you down? Do we just fine you some more? Like we put, like
it's a really, really good system. I think it's amazing. I don't operate in it that much, but the general rule is let's say the EU will set a limit for each type of heavy industrial business, right? For the amount they're allowed to emit. So like cement or steel, for every ton of steel that you produce, you're allowed to emit this much. If you go over that, you have to buy carbon credits. They're called allowances in that market. And those allowances come from people that are actually delivering steel below that threshold. So it's a really good market system, incredible incentives to reduce your emissions, because if you do a bad job, you've got to spend loads more money, reduces your margin. If you do a good job, you can actually make money, which is
it's kind of like a bonus incentive type thing. Like, if we if we go below this, we could get this markup on that.
Yeah, I know those companies, there's many elements of them are very difficult to decarbonize now. Like, they need loads of fossil fuels to create, really high temperatures to process steel or concrete. But a lot of them are doing a good job. They fall under that threshold, and an electric car manufacturer, the life cycle emissions of those products, after they've been on the road for a certain number of time, they're significantly lower than a big pickup truck or whatever. So they do reap some benefit from that, and that's the story of Tesla. I think without that system in place, Tesla probably would have struggled early on.
Yeah, because I think that's the news article I read was that they were making all this money from sales on paper, but that money hadn't come in yet. So what helped them cash flow was this immediate sale of I think that was the actual article. That's what it was about. I was like, well, that's interesting. Like so from what you're saying, it's like if you're in a business or a sector where the government has set this compulsory limit, you can. And well, the opportunity is actually not there. It's not really an option. It's really just there for you to take. It should just be part of your business strategy, right? Like that's one thing that we have to sell because it's there. It's kind of like getting tax credits. It's like if it's there and available, you should be taking advantage of it, right?
Yeah, and that's it. That's the entire carbon market. It's like taking value from those who emit to those that don't, and that's the voluntary market basically is the same thing. If someone somewhere in the world has grown loads of trees and properly maintained them and measured them and they know how much carbon they've taken out of the ground and they've registered that, they're then selling it to someone in this country that's manufacturing something and emitting all these emissions, and they're making a trade. That's all it is, and it's a rapidly growing market at the moment. A lot of opportunity in it.
Is there a way for so it's voluntary, but as far as terminology goes, is there a way to if you were to be a startup in this space, is there a way to reinforce the message of why this is good, and why it's beneficial financially for the company? So if they're saying, if they're a business that produces footwear, and their rubber factory they've got a small factory, they're not massive, and maybe they're not getting the compulsory notices, but let's say they're small, they're producing soles for shoes, so they have this opportunity to then either offset by buying, or is there a threshold that they can then go below that they can make? Is there an opportunity there for or does that not exist yet?
So I'd say one of the main reasons that companies are doing this on a voluntary basis is a form of marketing and sort of a USP for their products, because consumer demand for sustainable goods is going up, and there's a lot of pressure from many other stakeholders. But if you can create a sustainable product, regardless of how sustainable it is, it's still going to have some emissions left over, right? So if you want to close the gap and create a carbon neutral product, which is basically where you've offset the full emissions of that product, there are some people that would value that, and you'd either be able to have a competitive advantage over some of your competition, or potentially put a little bit of a margin on your product that someone will happily pay, because they can wear those shoes and know that they're not causing as much damage. But at the moment, it's a little bit politicized, this carbon offset market. So I think any person that wants to get into it first, or maybe buy them for their products or their business, they should definitely weigh up the potential negative sides of this, which some people aren't a fan of them. Some people think of them as basically cheating, and we would always say to our clients that want to offset, just make sure you've done a good job of making the product as sustainable as possible, reducing the emissions, before you then do that last bit of offsetting. Because if it just looks like you're creating a normal shoe and then offsetting the emissions without doing anything else, some people would say that's cheating.
I think and I think, I mean, as I'm hearing you explain it, the thing that keeps kind of like coming to mind is like, how do you calculate, like if you like, oh, what's your electricity usage? You can look at your units of electricity. It's very simple. You have a meter. You look at your water usage in a house, you can see, yeah, there's a meter. Like I think this is where you come in, right? This is your model. Like, how do you calculate carbon, how much carbon you're using on your value chain, like you said? So I feel like you are the calculator almost, like you're the, is that
That's
right?
it.
Is that where your business fits? You're just, if I'm, because there's no real way to measure it without getting a consultancy, have someone come in and actually have a look from top to bottom. It's like an audit, right? Like, how are we going to know how much is what?
Yeah, I kind of see this industry. So we do a lot of that. That's a big chunk of our business. It was how our business started, doing all of those measurements for businesses or even products. But I kind of see it like as, it's almost like an account. You're acting as an accountant from that perspective, because a lot of this is driven by financial data anyway, because you can look at everything that was purchased, whether it's services or materials that went into that product, and that can give you a good idea. But like long term, the accounting industry has been around for a long time, and software does a pretty good job of getting you most of the way there. But then you need accountants, just to double check it and to audit it and make sure it's done properly. The software at the moment for carbon, for small businesses, I think it probably is there. You'd be able to get a pretty good understanding of your footprint using some pretty simple software. Some of it can be quite expensive. But the issue is that actually having the data to feed that software is tricky, because this is where it's almost like accounting mixed with sort of science and supply chain knowledge.
Well, like it can make the calculations, but you've also, it's almost like a marketplace. You need, so let's say it's, correct me if I'm wrong here. Like, so let's say I've got a software, it's a small company, I'm a service-based business, so I don't actually make anything, but I buy stuff in that I deliver for clients. So like, this software is now calculating all my purchases. It's actually, but the thing is, it would need to know what it is that I'm purchasing. So it would have to know the other company too, and it have to know what their output is, so that it can then give me a calculation, right? That would be,
that's well, that would be the holy grail, let's say.
okay. All right.
And I do think
So
we'll
if
get
anyone's
there.
listening, that's where the money's at, right there.
Yeah, there are a lot of people trying to do. The issue is that the data just isn't there at the moment. I'm sure back in the day, when the finance industry kicked off, it was difficult to get data from all your suppliers and feed it into one ledger. At the moment, it relies quite heavily on sort of average data. So you can look
So
at
what
all the
you
types.
need is then for every company out there to like
feed into
feed into one central database that this is what our output is, and regularly do this.
And then you just be able to track all the carbon all over the globe. It would make it very easy.
So who's setting that up, man? Because that's a stock I want to buy.
There are a lot of big people trying to get in the game. A lot of the big, like let's say IT services companies or tech companies that already have access to a lot of data and already integrated in a lot of business, like Salesforce, Microsoft are all trying to get into it. But again, it's just, for at least in the short term, the data is just not there. You've got to use a lot of and also it's not just not there, it's the data that you have within your own company. It's just very difficult to translate that into anything that can go into software, because we have a lot of our own sort of specialist automated tools that can do some of it for us. But at the end of the day, you need a lot of eyes looking at it to make sure it's correct, and to make sure you're not misleading the company and their clients and their shareholders that they're emitting more or less than they are. But I do see software eventually getting there. But for now, consulting is necessary. But there are loads of other consulting activities that fit in around this. Like net zero strategy.
What do you guys? So what if that's only one part of what you do? Then what's the rest of it? What is it that you guys? I guess what makes you different? What makes you so good at what you're doing right now?
Well, I think also the USP is we have tried to sort of we sort of treat this as a sort of pragmatic problem. This is quite a politicized topic, and some people say we have to just sacrifice everything and get these carbon footprints down as low as possible at any cost. And then there are some people that just don't care or don't believe it. Right, they're the two ends of the spectrum. We try to fit in, a little bit closer to those sacrifice everything at all costs, but in a way that actually is feasible for companies to do. And the majority of our team, are all scientists or engineers. So we can understand the company and we can understand their problems and actually give them practical solutions. So a big part of our offering is net zero strategy. But I could give you a little bit of like how these products sort of evolved, because we just started, back in the day, doing some calculations for this Ugandan sort of rainforest project that we wanted to do, and we got our built a sort of skill set based around this carbon accounting, right? You take the information from the company, you go around finding all these industry averages, maybe speak to their suppliers, that feeds into their footprint, and that's the sort of core base of our business, and that's what we started off doing. But there are so many different services that people need to actually do something about their carbon footprint once they have it, or to improve it, or to know how to market it. Like, this is what we're emitting, this is what we're doing well, but how do I tell people without getting it wrong or misleading them, or greenwashing? That's the current term for it. But the key that we are trying to focus on now is how, they've got that baseline carbon footprint, they know what they're doing, right? That's how we started off. But then what do they do with that afterwards? What is that path to net zero? And the more detail you have in that footprint, the more accurate it is, the more you know what you can do about it. And ideally, you want to do the stuff that's cost effective first, renewable energy, like electrification of your fleet, converting your heat processes to something electricity driven that's more efficient. So there's a lot that people can do, but that's the sort of next sort of product that we offer. It's the net zero strategy, and getting that verified by the SBTi, so people actually know that you're doing what you say you're doing. And then another aspect of this is just all the data involved in this. So like, companies are not set up to actually fix this problem. It blows my mind, actually. Like, we started working with all these small companies, and you go in and all their systems would be messy. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. It's the same with all the big companies as well. You jump in and it takes them months and months and months to find simple bits of data, and it's and in a way they don't really understand many detailed elements of their business, because they can't use their data to sort of to actually see what's going on. And so by putting like really strict data governance processes in, it doesn't actually just help their sustainability endeavors. It's just good for the company, and because they can then use all this data for other insights, and to support other projects and other investment decisions, that when that data is not clear, you can't do that. So and I do think that's why often we'll see companies that are taking this seriously. They'll get this positive return on investment. Some of that might come from the tech that they're deploying to reduce their emissions. I personally think, though, that they have to make an investment to manage their business really, really well. And I think that just pays dividends outside of the sustainability space as well. If you can manage your data properly, you know how your business is running, and you can make more agile decisions. You can spend your money more wisely. And I think
I think if you're like that, like, and you've gotten to the point where A, you're lean and mean like that, and B, you've got a business that's now super sustainable, as close to like, I feel like, even from like, if you're supplying businesses who are like, let's say, as time goes on and more the pressures like increases essentially, and more companies have to now, or are very heavily encouraged to become, so they're not necessarily the compulsory market, they are in the voluntary sector. But I can almost see, like, to get a certain accreditation, you need to hit this threshold. To get this kind of tender agreement with that big company, you have to be at this sort of threshold. And so for them to meet these thresholds, I don't know if threshold's the right word, but benchmark or whatever.
It works, yeah.
Threshold works. If to be that, they have to, if they can't produce it themselves, they now need to chop and change their suppliers. So because they can do it that way. So if you're a company that can actually operate at that level, you've now got, again, that's a selling point for you. That could probably help you get ahead of the race. And that's not even like, I'm almost seeing that, like, I mean, if you look at like the pivotal shift from petrol gas cars to electric over the last couple of years. I mean, when the situation with Ukraine took place, I think that's when I noticed it. Setting aside what's happening with Ukraine, but just from a marketing perspective, and seeing the advertisements, commercials, media, everything shift almost overnight, just from like, we're going electric. Every car company on the planet just said, yep, we're going electric. Here's our car. And it's like, you can't even buy these things yet, but they're like promoting them like they're available. Like the only ones you can, at least when I started looking, the only one that you could buy and have and take delivery of within a couple of weeks was a Tesla at the time. Obviously that's changed now, but every single car company, manufacturer had, this is our fleets, this is our current available, this is what's coming next. And it's like, it just happened. It happens. I mean, before that point, all I ever heard was, oh, Mercedes is going to go fully electric by 2035 and such. VW is going to do it by this day. And then suddenly it became, no, we're doing it now. We're doing it right now. And it's like this, I think maybe Ukraine was the trigger for that, where there was a threat of the gas being turned off. And so that just kind of put everyone into like fifth gear and just made it all happen. But like, I can almost see that consistently happening now. We're having enough like world-changing events. I don't know if anyone's noticed with COVID, with the war and everything else that's been happening over the last like 4 or 5 years. Like, it seems like no matter what, we're just going to speed up the process to getting there. So it might be a better, it's probably better. You're better off doing this.
I am positive. Like, I know there's a huge amount of negativity here, but renewable energy in particular is a good one. And like, post-Ukraine, I think people understand, importing your energy from halfway across the world, where someone could just switch off the tap, is not secure. Whereas if you've got, solar farms and wind farms dotted all around your own country, or in the seas surrounding your country, it's difficult to switch that off.
Your eggs aren't all in one basket, right? I mean,
exactly.
Do you remember seeing the maps when they started putting that on the news, and you started seeing that one pipeline that came through? It was like, hang on a sec, that is literally just one pipeline. Like, how basic is this? Is actually a pipeline that just spurts oil and gas through? It's like,
I think so.
I thought we were more sophisticated than this. And then they talk about tankers with just tons of barrels. I'm like, okay, I kind of never really paid attention to this, but this is how we get it. They haven't figured out other ways to do this. We're still just buying it from them, and that's how we get it. It's just such a basic, like, horse and cart method of getting something to. It's like so simple. It's like, well, especially when you look at like companies like Google and some of the most sophisticated technology out there, and the AI and robots, and then you're like, okay, yeah, we use a pipe. It's like, and we put the drums on a boat and we send it. It's like, really? Is that so? Yeah, I think having the wind farms, having the solar. Do you remember? I'm definitely an Elon Musk fanboy. So I used to follow his brother Kimball Musk. Before he ended up making his recent business, like Square Roots, I think, which is another really cool thing, which is about sustainable farming. But that side, he actually started off with, I think it was Solar City, right?
I think he might still have it.
Well, Solar City got bought out by Tesla and became Tesla Solar. So I was like, it's like he's been like, they've been doing a lot. Like, if it wasn't Elon himself, it was like him, via his brother, like, hey, build this solar thing because we're going to need it. It's like you've got to think that you have to think this way, because if everything's going in this direction, which it is, I mean, if you've got presidents saying it's nonsense and it's still like ablaze, if we go back to that fire analogy, like, this is not going anywhere. And all these massive economy is shifting businesses and organizations like car manufacturers. And when VW say, all right, we're completely electric, all the other stuff is over with. We're selling all our V8s for dirt cheap now. I don't know if you've noticed, all the sports cars are sitting at around 150 to 200k at the moment because they're trying to offload them. They would normally be up there at like the 500 grand mark, and they're just getting rid of these engines as fast as they can because they don't need them anymore. They're shifting. It's like, we're having these massive companies to make this cataclysmic shift. Like, you have to follow suit in business. I'm like trying to, the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you is I'm like, how do I incorporate it in my own little business? And I've got a little software company. It's crazy.
Well, I guess being in this industry, I'm constantly seeing opportunity, right? Because we have a core set of products. But those core set of products allow us to understand like industry challenges that they have. And if you can create any sort of tech or any product that provides a high return on investment and easy to implement decarbonization for a company, then you're sorted. Like, we worked with a company recently and trying to figure out how they could, have employee benefits that were sustainable, because the employee behavior actually impacts a company's footprint, right? Them commuting to work, companies will have to report that. Even them working from home, they will have to report that. And there's so much opportunity there to help companies help their employees, like an app with loads of sustainable benefits, right? So links to renewable energy providers, or loans for energy certificates in their houses, and for support insulating their homes. Like these are win-wins, because they are massive holes of value that aren't being filled. If you can connect those dots from the company to the employee, that's a big one. But yeah, it's that there are so many challenges, because the space is changing so quickly, that like the standards that these companies and the laws that these companies have to abide by are changing so quickly. They need help, because sustainability is still a new industry. Like getting hold of people to work in this industry is not easy. And I would argue that for sustainability, as long as you've got some sort of technical background with a bit of passion, not specifically to sustainability, but you can get in there. And if you've got the entrepreneurial mindset and you can understand companies' problems and find solutions for them, they will bite your hand off, and investors will bite your hand off as well. Like you go on all of these crowdfunding platforms at the moment, almost all of the businesses on there are sustainable businesses.
I've noticed that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I can't I can't, ignore it anymore. And I did, and I was trying to. I thought it was, I just thought it was this big thing that, well, big companies will take care of that. That's not something I can get involved with. But I'm like seeing it. It's like it's come down to the ground floor now. I feel like I could get involved somewhere. It's like I think anyone with an entrepreneurial mindset, if you're opportunity focused and that's what you're built for, like you're looking for opportunity. And the people who would be listening to this podcast, that's who it's going to be. It's going to be like, well, where can I make some money? How can I build a business that's sustainable, that's long-term? This is one of those long-term ones. This is one of those ones that you kind of, I don't know if you've noticed, even when people were sniffing their nose at it 6, 7, 10 years ago, and it was just like the EU and like governments talking about it at summits and whatnot. It's not going away. And every milestone, the time difference between milestones being hit now is far smaller and far shorter than it was before. Like now things are happening on a yearly basis or quarterly basis. Like things are changing. And I think where you are in your business, is you're going to see that right now you're a consultancy. Maybe you do end up with a software. Maybe you do end up like cracking the code on something and actually have a product, or,
Yeah, we are like, for us, we would look for products that we could leverage alongside the others. So like, tech that could support the consultancy services that we provide. But again, like there are so many ideas that we're having every day, like stuff, oh my God, I can't believe this doesn't exist. Or like the government is incentivizing all of this stuff to try and make it happen, and no one's snapping their hands off. Like there are grants everywhere. There's tax relief everywhere. Even now, if you want to upgrade your home to a new boiler, the government will basically pay for it for you.
See, that's the thing. Not many people know, and there's so many. Actually, there's a lot of industries where that exists. It's like there's a lot that's been offered there by these institutions and governments, but they're not. It's like they're not available. It's like they've figured out how to structure the offer, right? But they don't know how to market it, because I don't know about it. So many, but when someone tells me, hey, did you know you could get your solar panels for free? Did you know you can get your boiler for free? Do you know that you could actually forget about getting it for free? Do you know you can build a business around it, that you can get other people to do it, and you'll double dip? The government will pay you a fee for actually getting it in the property, and you can charge the property owner something to get it in there. It's like, hang on a sec, there's actually little ecosystems here where you can actually set up a sustainable business and just work for yourself.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I do think the UK is a leader in this, and there's a lot of sort of negative press, but the UK is doing a good job, and I think we will succeed in hitting net zero, and I think we will create this massive sort of sector for services, tech from this, that we can provide to everyone else. If we can get there first, other countries are going to need the support getting there as well. And if we can prove it works, it's cost effective, because I guarantee it will be. Like renewable electricity is coming down massively. Electric cars, the progress curve is pretty staggering, right? All of this tech will save money. It will make our lives better. And I'm hoping we can grow a huge industry out of it. And the government is pumping billions and billions of pounds trying to make that happen and offering incentives. So it's the people that can figure out how to take advantage of those, build their business with, a little bit of government support from it, help the UK get there, but then also help the rest of the world get there. Because from our business perspective, just accidentally, we are now probably making half of our revenue exporting services outside of the UK, because if countries want to trade with the West, they are going to have to adapt and play by the West's rules.
This is the play box you got to play in now. Like, these are the rules of the game.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah,
right, so let's take this to you. I want to, like, because you're like really involved in this. You know everything that there is to know, and you're in the best position to kind of adapt and with everything that's coming as well. So I think we can keep talking about your, I guess, predictions of the future and like your business. But you know what? I want to know a little bit about you. Like, I want to find out about how you got started in this, because it's, we've kind of we started talking about you already in position. And a lot of the people that this podcast is aimed at is those who are thinking about getting started in business. They might be sitting at a desk working for a company and they're thinking, how am I going to start the company that I want to get into? So it's not necessarily how they can start a company within specifically like the sustainability space, but it's really just about like, what's your journey? How did you get involved with this? Like, were you always this entrepreneurial? Because clearly you're opportunity focused, but you're also very educated in this specific area. Like, was this a natural transition because you were qualified and this was the thing after the company that you worked for, or was this like this offshoot? I know you mentioned this side project in Uganda, but please tell us the story from, like, I guess, day one. Like, what were you like with, like,
well,
your entrepreneurial?
yeah, I'll go like, so just before we started the business, so my background is engineering. I worked in an engineering company, ended up going into management, supply chain operations, right? But I get bored very easily. So a side hustle seemed like a nice idea. I was always open to that. And my best friend, Toby, at the time, we went to university together. His sort of background was more specialized to, let's say, this industry. He did a PhD, environmental science and bioenergy. And, but I get bored because we both get bored easily. We wanted the idea of, creating something, watching it grow, taking a challenge, taking a risk. And I'd say we had very little responsibility, because that's a big one, right? It's a big risk to start your own business. But, we tried to minimize that risk, but we basically thought we could work well together. So let's just try something. And tree planting, we just both like the sound of it. I love the idea of going over and planting some trees. So did he, in another country, and watching a forest grow. But what we realized, like in doing that, and setting up that limited liability company and trying to just make something happen, you learn a lot in the process, and you start to notice all of these opportunities, and it gives you that opportunity to pivot, right? If you identify an opportunity and you're driven to try and find something like that, we noticed the opportunity of carbon accounting. Now, like,
did you notice that? Did you have that in mind right when you started? Like, did you have that grand plan in mind, or was it like, well, we're just going to go plant some trees because we think it's a good idea and it'd definitely be good for people? Or did you think we could be on this path? This would be phase one. You didn't have this big plan built out. It wasn't that.
There was very little plan, right? We just we thought it was Toby's idea. Like he had a partnership with his PhD in Kampala, and we met and it was partnered with a guy called Opio, who's also a shareholder in our business. And I think they'd basically just been going around Uganda, and they'd seen some of these trees cropping up, and like, oh, what's going on here? And it's like, oh, this is a carbon project. And I don't think they thought much of it, but when he got back from Uganda, it's just like, this looks quite cool. Maybe we should try and do something like that. And at the time, I was working 9 to 5, doing nothing on the outside. And I just thought, you know what, regardless of whether it worked, I'd like to give it a go. And, there's not a huge amount of risk. Like, I didn't have to jump ship. I could do my 9 to 5, a few hours in the evenings or the weekends doing something that I actually enjoyed, was challenging. We did that for maybe a year or two, trying to get this to work, and before we ended up pivoting. But in that process, like, you just learn so much. It was ridiculous. And I would say that is the entire entrepreneur's journey. It's like, I have learned so much during this, that even if my business failed tomorrow, obviously I don't want that to happen. For me personally, I wouldn't treat it as a negative outcome. And I think that that mindset is really, really useful. If you can develop that prior to setting off on that journey, or taking that jump, and you don't have a lot of responsibility in the background, that, if something did fail, your life would be turned upside down. It's like, why wouldn't you do that? Why not? And
So you didn't have like a contract in mind. Well, this is how much we're going to make from this
no.
year 1, year 2. This was just purely a passion project for you.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just that. And I would say that that's also like, if you combine something that's a passion project, right, with something where you think, if certain things go right on this journey, there's a potential business at the end of it. Because we did want to sort of monetize the tree planting project, and a lot of people have, but the sort of internal incentives for both of us were not just the money element. It's like, all right, we're a bit bored doing what we're doing. So it'd be nice to, be our own bosses and go and do something together, where no one has to tell us what to do. We can sort of, take this image in our brain of what our business could look like, and try and make it happen. But yeah, it's I think if you can combine that enjoyment element with something that gives you like a little bit of an opportunity to grow a business, then all of those incentives, I think, make it more likely to succeed. And then you can combine that with the fact that, I can take this risk. It's not going to be too damaging. I'm not taking all my money and sinking it into a project and I go bankrupt if it doesn't work. For us, it was that very sort of slow enjoyment phase, before the business took off. And it almost reached a tipping point, right? He finished his PhD. We gave him like a few months to say, all right, we'll fund you with the little money that we've made over the last 2 years. We will fund you to try and take this full time, right? So this is the moment. It either works or it doesn't work, because otherwise he would have had to get a job then, and then it would have been a bit more difficult. But yeah, that's kind of like the start of how we kicked off MyCarbon. But since then, the growth of the business has come from just identifying additional opportunities on top of that. Like, we're constantly seeing gaps that we can fill. And then, finding great people to come and work with us, because also being like in an industry that, a lot of people are very passionate about, like getting great people to come work for you, which is like for services-based business for us, we wouldn't be able to operate without that. We got to get people in that can sort of, see our vision, and then, get on board and deliver something that adds value to clients. And,
I mean, you're a company of 10 right now. Is that right? You mentioned that at the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah, so we 10 full-time and then a few part-time on the side, like late supporting staff. But, I think we'll probably be taking two on before the end of the year. And I think there's a reasonable chance we can double the business next year. It's just at the moment we're just absolutely buried. It's like, that's the negative about taking our approach, right? That, no external funding means that every time you want to grow your business, it's this risk, and it's like, this
you've got to get new
apprehension.
contracts, right? You've got to win new business constantly. So you've got the selling side of I mean, that's it. It's the conversation I've had has been really a lot of it's been about the technical, not that I wouldn't say technical, but like the core business. But then there's the actual, like, just the rudimentary business things. Like, you've got to just sell your service. There's got to be outreach. There's got to be some kind of inbound marketing. If it's thought leadership and it's pull, it's like, how do you've got to have that part of, there's one thing doing the job. That's the thing.
Yeah,
that's always a trouble about services. I have a service offering that I've done for 15, 20 years now. I probably around 18 actually. And it's like, if I'm being specific, you've got the service side, which takes up, once I get a client or a contract, it takes 100% of my time. I'm thinking about it nonstop. But while I'm doing it, I can't conduct outreach. I don't have the time, the mental capacity. I don't have the drive to do the sales side, which is getting new clients. Like, how does that happen for you? Like, when did that start happening? When did you gain the confidence? I guess when that was, automated, or when it was consistent enough for you to start employing other people? Because as soon as you take on staff, that's a salary, that's a monthly outgoing. You take on 10 staff with an average salary of $5,000, that's a lot of money that you're having to kick out every month. Like, you've got to make sure that you've got enough.
I think it's like a really, really good question, because it never gets easy. But the benefit of this process is you learn. Like, if you can learn from, the worst months we've had in this business have led to all of the best months, because that anxiety and that pain from, knowing that you have to go and get this, otherwise everything ends, right? It creates this mindset over time, which is, you got to keep on digging. And like, I'll give you a little bit of background on me. I was very laid back in my previous jobs. Like, it blew my mind that like MDs and all of the directors were able to just constantly keep these businesses functioning. I was like, Christ, I'm just like this little cog, and what I do doesn't make a big difference. They are entirely responsible for that business and everyone that's employed by it, and all their clients. And it's never ending, right? I think in the early days, when income wasn't a big thing for us, we were part-time, what we could do, like every quarter, look back at what happened, what worked well and what didn't work well. Next quarter, I'll do more of what worked well and less of what didn't work well. And that sort of reflection period, which every business does, but it's so much more important in those early stages because there is so much learning actually happening. But if you can, I think that like you can almost do any business, right? If you just do something, look back at it, what went well, what didn't work well, and do more of what went well in the next.
Just double down on what worked. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you could just fast forward sometimes, I mean, there's some of the mistakes that I've made and just some of the simple stuff, like even we're just building out the software that we're creating. It's like, it just took if we look back at the amount of mistakes and money wasted,
but they're beneficial for you. Like this is it. Like you become a better person because of it. And like, another thing, we don't do this as much now, but in that learning process, like actually figuring out how to operate a business, just reading books. If there's something you don't know, or if there's an issue you're having, someone else has already had it. Like there's some really great, like the lean startup is kind of like this methodology that we're talking about now, continuous improvement. Every month you get better and you fix what went wrong. And then we were never salespeople as well. We had to figure out how to do that. And it is a sort of natural progression process. Like you're forced to do it. But there's so many resources out there. Like every time I read a book now, it's like, it feels like I'm making a $5,000 investment in myself and my business, because that knowledge, like I'm going to have that forever.
Well, it probably costs you that much in terms of the time it takes out. I mean, I read books. I read a ton of books. I wrote a book, and I'm like, but it's like when you're an entrepreneur, when you're running a business, where you can't just turn off at 5 or 6.
Yeah.
You're not, if you're commuting to work, or you're not just reading a book because you can turn on in a minute when you get to the office, like, because when you're running a company, you're constantly thinking about it. So it's when you do take the time to read a book, which is not like watching a movie, which you can kind of glaze over. Book is reading word by word and taking in that information, assimilating it, and doing something with it. It takes a lot out of you. So even if it is just $20 or something, it's like it probably is $5,000 to you, because there's an opportunity cost there. It's taking time out of your brain power.
And that's why they have, the reading has slowed down. But I had a commute to my old job, and it was an hour each way, so I could get through an audio book a week. In that year I probably went through 50 audiobooks, all related to this business that I was trying to set up in the evenings and weekends. And my business partner was the same. And just do it, because we were doing it gradually. Like we weren't fully invested in the business. We had a bit of time to sort of figure it out and what worked well. Because we hadn't gone out and got loads of investments, just, do it straight away. We had that time to sort of learn and try and absorb and think about what worked and what didn't work. And that's how we built it. And, and anyone can do that. Like you don't have to be this like visionary entrepreneur to go out. Sorry about that. To go out and, just have an idea and just work on it and chip away at it and make yourself a better person. Let me put, I should have put my phone on silent. Sorry, Sam.
You're fine. You're fine. I just feel like when it comes to self-educating like that, and taking the time to read, taking the time to listen, if you're listening to audiobooks, or like there's a point where it becomes like a waste of time, because you start just getting into that world of fantasy and dreaming, where you kind of just chase your own carrot that you're creating for yourself. But if you're actually serious about business and you're serious about taking those next steps, and I think it's super important to get industry knowledge. I'm not talking about a whole bunch of self-help books. Like, you definitely need a self-help book. Some, like, I think they have their place. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote one, but at the same time, it's like it has its place. Like, it's there as a recipe of, as a roadmap to follow. But what you do need to do is become an expert of your industry. So I guess when it comes to like sustainability, I'm going to hazard a guess here. Majority of your books were based around that, around your expertise,
It,
right? Because you have to know everything. That's the one thing that I find that is bugs me the most when I talk to some people about a business they want to get into, and they don't really know much about it. They only know what they're doing in it. They don't know about the wider context of stuff. Like, you're not an expert yet, and I kind of want you to be if I'm going to send you money.
yeah, and I think that there's two things that kind of like stick out to me there, like from our sort of initial journey, and I think you mentioned one, like, don't not the there's like an element where you can just think and learn, but then there's actually get that doing, or like jumping over that initial barrier. And I do think, we partnered up, me and my friend partnered up, holding each other accountable to actually do stuff. First of all, like that accountability that comes from having two people in a business. I would never have been able to do this by myself. Maybe my business partner, but um,
But you have
Ali,
three, right? It's not just the two.
we've got it. We brought a business partner on later on who was like another one of our university friends, to help with the growth phase, because he'd grown a consultancy from a very small startup.
With me, I found that three works. I
I
don't
think
know
three
why.
would be very good. Yeah,
I think two, when one person becomes negative Nancy, it kind of brings down the other sometimes, and you kind of both get
yeah,
stuck in a rut. It's kind of hard for one person to be always uplifting and the other person to sort of tag out of it. But it's like,
completely agree.
I
Yeah,
think when you have the third person, it's like that third person can always be the person who's like, hang on, let's just check ourselves here and get back on track. And I feel like three seems to work. And I didn't think of that as partnerships, but I used to think of that in terms of when hiring staff. When I used to hire sales staff for my own businesses, when I used to have my own sales floors of teams of people. But when I started my companies, I had to always start with three. One was they became too close to you, and I couldn't build a business with someone who just became a friend. Like, especially when I started losing concentration, I would get distracted. They'd do it with me. I'm like, okay, this is not going to work.
yeah,
So I think two people, but then two people, one person can bring the other down, and then the office temperature drops like a brick in water. Like, you need the third person, just for some reason, just seems to be the person that kind of keeps everything on an even keel. It's like your
yeah.
business can then actually grow from there. But that was from a hiring perspective. But I brought it into my own businesses now as having partners of three, because it works the same. It's like we need each other to keep the thing going sometimes.
And also matching, like, having like a diverse set of, let's say, strengths and weaknesses between those three is great, because I think it can always blow up, like, with the director. Like, you can always disagree with certain things, but if you can respect like the individual strengths of those persons and the weaknesses of them, first of all, they work great together if they're diverse. But what one thing we have to be so careful, like, if we do ever have disagreements, getting them sorted as quickly as possible, and having respect for the other person, and getting over it, like, it's absolutely critical. But those differences that we have are so valuable, because I'd say, like, my initial business partner, he was a doer. He'd jump ship and go and walk up to the front door of a big corporate building and ask to speak to someone. I'm the person that sits back and double thinks about everything, and make sure stuff doesn't go wrong in the future. No laws get broken accidentally, that sort of stuff. And then we've got, like, the other director. He is the guy that he's jumped in now, and he brings that routine and structure that we didn't have. We were, we building a startup from two people. It's a very, very messy process. Bringing that sort of stability in at some point, once you reach a certain size, is really, really useful.
It's funny, I have the same dynamic with my partners.
Yeah,
I'm the guy that goes out, smashes on the front door, says, "Hey, I want to
yeah,
speak to somebody." And it's like, but then I've got my other partner who is like, "Okay, let's go back here. Let's see, let's dot the I's, cross the T's, make sure we're doing the right thing. This software, GDPR, this, that." I'm like, GDPR? Oh yeah, that's a thing. I forgot about that. And it's like I constantly have to be. I feel like I'm always getting checked by my partner, and then of course my other partner, who's like, everything has to be like, she follows a plan for like executing tasks. So where I think like the grand picture, this person is now able to take everything and sort of piece it together like a jigsaw puzzle. I'm like, oh, so we work off each other perfectly. And it's like, even where we have pushback, it's even if we disagree with each other, it doesn't matter, because I can't do what you do. There's overlap knowledge, but the ability to execute sits with you, not me.
Yeah.
And so because of that, we now have to make this thing work, because we've all signed up for the same thing. So I think it's a good space to be.
That's exactly it. And like, there are going to be people that want to go out and do this alone, and I respect that massively. But we've taken the easy approach, and I think, you know, finding people that can fill your gaps, and that sounds a bit weird, but you also respect them as well, like, you know, that you couldn't do it without them. It's a pleasant process. It's nice, especially if you have a good friendship with them. But it's, for me, it's a necessity, and I think for them it's a necessity as well. Like, you know, none of us could run the business without the other one at this point.
Especially, you know, when balancing your family or your personal life. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I have a wife and kids. Like, I need someone to help me in the business that's not under me, that doesn't look to me for direction. I need other people to like just be doers and decision makers in and of themselves, so they can kind of take the reins while I'm now, you know, goofing around with my 5-year-old. It's like, like I can't switch back into business mode that quickly. Like I need time to warm up. Like I need other people in position to do so. When you're starting up, you know, it's easy to say, well, you can just hire competent staff. Well, look, you've got to be big enough to hire competent staff. If you're starting up at startup phase, it's kind of good to have people at your same level that are as vested as you are in this thing working. And I think that's important.
And it's not just their skills, it's also like, you know, doing it by yourself, if you start to lose energy and, you know, lose focus, you know, pulling that back is very, very difficult. Whereas, you know, we go through stresses, you know, and as every company does, but having those people there with you that, you know, if one person's down, the other two people can help bring them back, and vice versa. You know, it makes it way more difficult to fail, because, you know, all three of us are going through the same process, and, you know, we're not like, you know, we're not psychopaths. Like, it's a brutal process, but having more than one person to drive it is, very, very valuable. So I think, like, anyone considering getting into business, as long as they can find the right person, should definitely consider it. Makes the entire process a million times easier.
Definitely does. What they were coming up to that time where I think I would really want your insight on what you think, what would be your biggest takeaway for the entrepreneur listening in right now. We've covered a lot. Like, we've covered your industry, your specialism, we've covered like your journey. What would you say? And even if it's repeating the same one of the things that we've covered already, like, what would be the one thing that you would give away to the person who's considering starting their own company right now? With whatever industry it is, if you could give a nugget of advice, what would that be?
Oh, there's quite a few, but like, if you can find something that you enjoy and that excites you, and you can create this mindset of being willing to sort of be willing to fail in doing it. I think the enjoyment will drag you along until you find something that actually works. Yeah, I think combining those two incentives, you know, building your own business and doing something that you enjoy or excites you, you know, as an opportunity that excites you. I think, you know, it doesn't have to happen overnight. It can be a gradual process, and you can learn a lot in that process. But if it excites you and you enjoy it and you're passionate about it, then eventually it will drag you to the point where it does start to work, and something can grow from it. So, you know, that's what we did.
Something you can do while you're ill, got the flu, going through a breakup.
Something that you're excited to go and do in the evenings and weekends, that you think at some point this might make me some money. You know, and that excitement, it's not just for you, it's not just what drives you along. Like, it can help if you're excited and passionate about something, it draws people in as well. Like,
well, it's that fire analogy, right? I think we're going back to it there. You just did it for me. It's like,
yeah,
you can get those logs on there, you've got a flame, becomes a blaze. If you can get people, if you're excited, it's going to have that viral effect, right? That's a dangerous word these days, viral.
Yeah,
it's going to have that effect where other people other people are going to feel it too, and they're going to get empowered and excited too. And the more people that you can speak to, the more people that you can convince, kind of helps convince you back when you're feeling low, when you start second guessing yourself. I think that's big too.
Yeah, if you enjoy thinking about the topic that you want to create a business about, and you can think about it a lot, that you'll find the opportunity and you'll push through it. And then that the passion is just as useful when you're growing the business as well, because you've got to build new clients, bring people on, get them passionate as well. So if you're not passionate about what you're doing, it's a very cliched piece, but I think it's foolproof in a way. It can't go wrong. Just start doing something in the evening that has some value, that you think it has some value and you enjoy. Eventually
you've got to do it. You've got to actually want to do it. I mean, there's countless times I've seen people talk about their business ideas and startup ideas, and people want to copy them because that's a good idea, that's going to make money. But the reality is, if you're not really passionate about it, you're going to check out way sooner. At the first obstacle, the first person that says no, that's it, I'll throw the towel in.
We could label it the lazy entrepreneur's approach, right? Yeah, you don't have to jump in, but if you enjoy it and you keep on digging away at it, eventually something will happen. And it's easy to do. Anyone can do that.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for coming on. I'm going to have to speak to you again, like a little way down the road, to have you. I want to see your trajectory, because you're in the consultancy world right now. You're very much in the mud, and I think it's still early, right? The world might have heard about sustainability for so long now, but that's just a conversation that's now becoming really apparent. Like it's really, I'm starting to see smaller businesses prop up everywhere, and they're not just like the thought leaders, they're actually building viable business models the way you are. And you're talking about other opportunities that are right on the horizon that are going to become available to us soon. So I feel like I want to speak to you in 6 months from now and have a conversation about what's happened in between, because I'm sure 6 months is probably enough time to see some opportunities arise in this space. And I'd love to explore those with you, man. I know there's going to be some opportunities and some interesting stories there.
Sounds fantastic. Yeah. Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been a lot of fun, and look forward to speaking to you in 6 months. See where we are.
I really appreciate you being here, man. Thank you very much. So for everybody else, if you like it, like and subscribe, and see you next time.